Quick, which genre does this game belong to? Hollow Knight is an exploration platformer. Metroidvania was originally used to describe games with RPG progression systems similar to what you'd find in Symphony of the Night. Hollow Knight doesn't incorporate those systems. There's no leveling up, no stats to manage, so the comparison doesn't feel appropriate. Whatever genre you want to call it, Hollow Knight is a game you frequently see hailed as one of the best in the genre. And as someone that's played Metroid and Castlevania to death, this game doesn't even come close. I first played it years ago and I never finished it. There was something about it that I didn't like, but I didn't really know what it was at the time. So I gave the game one last chance this year, and I still don't really like it. Now before you say, if you don't like it, don't play it, save your breath, because I stopped. I revisited Castlevania instead to understand why I can replay games like Metroid and Castlevania dozens of times, but I can't finish Hollow Knight once. But instead of using Symphony of the Night as a frame of reference, I replayed Order of Ecclesia, which I view as the best title in the series. It took the formula established in Symphony of the Night and smoothed out the rough edges. Is it the best in the genre? No, that's Super Metroid, but Order of Ecclesia is right up there. The point here is to illustrate why I don't like the game design of Hollow Knight by comparing it to a game that nails those same elements. Because if you consider Hollow Knight to be one of the best Metroidvanias, it had better come toe-to-toe with those namesake games. And it doesn't. The cornerstone of any good platformer is skill-based movement. With Castlevania, your horizontal velocity can be increased by canceling backflips, I call them backdashes, and there's a skill ceiling involved. Mashing backdash will force you to pause between each animation, but if you time the button at the right moment, you get this faster backdash chain. But the real secret sauce comes from canceling backdashes. With Magnus equipped, you can cancel the backdash animation, which allows you to immediately execute another backdash input, so you get this smooth glide across the screen. And because you're using an ability to cancel the backdash, you're draining your mana, so situational awareness becomes key. You can find yourself backdashing up to an enemy with depleted mana, which means you won't be able to attack them until the meter recharges. Backdash is an innate ability, you start the game with it. Magnus is unlocked maybe 15 minutes into the game, so from the beginning, you're granted this slick movement option you can use from start to finish. Hollow Knight doesn't start with a dash ability, you unlock it fairly quick, but until you do, you need to deal with this slow movement speed. I get that ability progression is the name of the game, but starting with such a shallow moveset means the game takes a few hours before movement becomes satisfying. In any other exploration platformer, that would be a problem, since a few hours in is typically how long it takes to get halfway through one of these. None of the Game Boy Advance or DS Castlevanias take more than 10 hours to beat for a first-time playthrough. Hollow Knight is much longer than your average exploration platformer, but it doesn't have a wider variety of abilities to unlock to compensate, which means you don't get that rapid-fire acquisition of new abilities since they're spread out over a much wider area. Once you unlock the dash, you can't time them to shorten the recovery, and you can't cancel the recovery animation. Instead, you can purchase a charm to shorten the cooldown between dashes. The game doesn't reward skillful dash inputs to increase your traversal speed. It forces you to determine whether or not quicker dashes are part of your build. There's no sense of satisfaction from moving around, because you don't need to improve to move faster, you just need to equip a charm. And before you mention pogoing as the primary advanced movement technique of Hollow Knight, Castlevania has pogoing too. You also unlock super dashes within a few hours. Super dashing is clunky. You need to charge the super dash, which means if you want to use it regularly instead of just in areas where it's needed, you need to stop moving to fire it off. Plus the recovery animation is pretty long, even if you cancel it, which means there's both start and end lag. It's not conducive to smooth traversal. The game gives you this powerful ability early on, but because it's so early on, they needed to balance it, so it's not satisfying to use. Castlevania saves the quickest movement glyph until the endgame, where it's tucked behind a secret exit in Dracula's castle. Because it's given to you at the very end, and it's hidden, it doesn't need to be balanced. You can enjoy cruising through the stages without any start or end lag. It's your reward for making it this far, and it forces you to rely on skillful backdashing for most of the game if you want to move around quickly. But even once you unlock this glyph, it's still not the fastest form of movement. Your reward for completing an optional stage is this glyph called Redire, or Redire, I think it's Latin, I don't know. You toss this magnified boomerang and immediately need to press a button to magnetize to it, then you can cancel the movement with a jump and chain the skill to soar through the air. It's by far the fastest form of movement, but it takes practice to master. Even attacking plays a role in movement in Castlevania. When you press the attack button while moving on the ground, Shinoa locks her feet in place, but if you attack in midair, there's no movement lock. Once you touch the ground after attacking, your momentum is preserved, so you can attack while moving by timing your jump and attack inputs. This is another part of Shinoa's moveset that rewards timing. With Hollow Knight, the game uses a different method to halt your momentum: recoil. Attacking enemies or walls induces recoil. The knight is pushed back when his nail makes contact. If you attack an enemy while standing on a ledge, you can push yourself off the ledge, which is infuriating. But, like dashing, the game allows you to patch this flaw by purchasing and equipping a charm that negates the recoil. A good portion of the charm system is designed around patching flaws in your moveset. That sounds obvious, but what I mean is, upgrades that should be permanent are turned into pieces of equipment. If you don't want to experience recoil, you can equip a charm. If you feel like your nail has a short hitbox, you can equip the longer nail charm. Even the ability to see where you are on the map is a charm that needs to be equipped, and you have a limited charm slot, so it takes hours before you can equip all of these quality of life charms at once. The game is so in love with its progression system that it intentionally removes basic features like the ability to see where you are, just to stretch its sense of progression across its long runtime. Where this becomes aggravating is with the map. Maps are simple things. Here's the map in Castlevania. It's on the second screen because the DS is perfect for this genre. You don't need to pause the action to reference where you are. It's always there, and it doesn't cover the action screen. It also auto-maps your movement. You don't need to buy maps, you're creating them as you explore. Hollow Knight wants you to purchase maps for each area, which would be bad enough, but you need to find a specific NPC in each of these areas to purchase them. His paper trails and whistling guides you towards his direction, but until you find his trail, you're wandering around aimlessly. Once you finally buy the map off of him, it's not even complete. You still need to explore and map out most of the rooms in each location yourself, but you can't make progress on creating a complete map until you first purchase the basic one. And even the ability to map these areas out yourself is an item that needs to be purchased. Marking NPC locations, benches, fast travel markers, all of these basic features need to be purchased in the name of progression. But these markers are so cheap, and they're all sold by the same merchant at the start of the game, so why even bother making these purchases optional to begin with? Who isn't going to just scoop them all up at once? But the worst part is that auto-mapping doesn't happen in real time. The map doesn't update until you either die or rest at a bench. Getting lost is half the fun of the genre, sure, but the developers took this literally. There's a difference between not knowing where to use your newfound power to proceed, and not knowing where the hell you are. With a map this huge, and with so much backtracking required, having the design philosophy of, well, we want you to get lost, so we made the map cumbersome, just makes exploration more tedious. For a linear game, sure, ditch the map, you don't need it. For an open-ended game, especially one of this scale, having a reliable map is crucial, and you can tell that the devs really didn't want to include a map in this game, but they were scared of backlash from the casual audience, so they put in this half-hearted, fragmented map system. The team placed signs around to guide you towards trams, benches, and stag stations, but they don't help much when you need to backtrack to other areas on foot. With a 3D game, you can see a landmark in the distance to orient yourself, so you can get away with not having a map. With 2D, you need to get more creative, and this sign system doesn't cut it. Also, the map isn't arranged in a grid like in Castlevania, so it's difficult to chart your movement in advance. In Castlevania, if I want to retreat to a save point, the grid allows me to plot out how many screen transitions I need to take and in which order. Left twice, down once, right once. You have a much better sense of direction because the rooms are displayed with uniform designs. In Hollow Knight, if I want to retreat to a bench, it's a lot more difficult to make a mental note on which direction to take because the rooms are so large and arranged in different shapes. It's difficult to tell where you are in each room without referencing the map. The frequent screen transitions in smaller rooms in Castlevania are a compromise given the hardware, but they also make navigation faster and easier. With Hollow Knight, navigation is slow. If I want to reference the map, I need to hold a button and keep it held. Plus, there's a small delay when bringing up the map, so if you're checking it constantly, and you are, you need to deal with this short delay every time. There's no option to tuck a minimap in the corner or keep a transparent overlay over the screen. The action doesn't even pause. The knight slows down as he examines the map in real time, so you can't even run with the map open. Everything about the world of Hollow Knight is designed to slow you down. There's no leveling up. Progression is tied to currency, so your incentive to kill enemies is not to gain experience, it's to gain money. Okay, that's fine, but why does the money need to explode out of enemies and chests and scatter around the environment? I'll tell you why. It's so you can buy a charm that automatically gathers the geo. If the charm system is designed to encourage replay value by allowing you to try out different builds, why do you need to forsake basic quality of life features to do so? Great, I can deal more damage with my powers, but now I can't automatically gather geo. I get knocked back every time I swing my nail, and I can't see where I am on the map. It's an opportunity cost, sure, but why do I need to make the game play worse to become stronger? You could argue that this is a unique way to make the game more challenging, give up conveniences to become more powerful, but some features like the ability to automatically gather geo don't make the game easier, they make it less obnoxious. Is it fun killing an enemy and watching all the money fall into a pit? And for the first several hours of the game, geo is your main source of progression. You need it to buy charms, charm slots, upgrade fragments, the lantern. Maybe the geo loses relevancy later on, but it's tied to your combat and exploration prowess for a long time. With Castlevania, sure you don't automatically absorb money, but money isn't your main source of progression. There's a traditional level up system with experience points, which are gathered automatically. Also, you're not trading conveniences for passive upgrades to develop a build, you're equipping glyphs. These are much more impactful rewards because they allow you to cast magic and wield weapons immediately. You don't need to backtrack to a bench to equip them. The middleman is cut out from the equation, which does wonders for the pacing because you can use the glyphs the moment you acquire them, and most of them are active skills, not strictly passive bonuses. You can also swap between 3 movesets on the fly to suit your needs for each enemy, which means you don't waste as much time in menus. Hollow Knight doesn't let you save preset charm builds. You need to swap them in and out manually if you want to adapt your playstyle before and after boss fights. Also, you're stuck with just one weapon, but this works in the game's favor during the boss fights, which are balanced around your limited moveset. The bosses are far and away the best parts of Hollow Knight. Their attacks are well telegraphed, they provide you with large enough windows to heal, and as you get better at learning their patterns, you can find openings to squeeze in extra attacks. These boss fights are good, damn good, because they are isolated from the exploration part of the game. Anything involving exploration is a chore. Anything involving boss fights is enjoyable. But Hollow Knight isn't a boss rush, it's an exploration platformer. Most of your time isn't spent fighting carefully tuned bosses, it's spent exploring and platforming. As great as the boss fights are, these fodder enemies aren't anywhere near as interesting to fight. The same could be said about Castlevania, but at least there, you've got dozens of glyphs to swap between to keep combat varied. Also, enemies have attribute weaknesses. A weapon that deals a ton of damage to one enemy may do little against another, further incentivizing you to switch between glyphs. Plus, the game is short and the variety is high, so you're not using any particular weapon for more than 20 or 30 minutes. And the thing is, even though the bosses are great in Hollow Knight, they're just as good in Order of Ecclesia, They're more challenging than the previous Castlevania games, and there's always a nearby save point so the run back is never brutal. Hollow Knight takes a page out of FromSoft's playbook in the worst possible way by forcing you to run through huge chunks of levels to get back to a boss, or to recover your Geo if you died. The boss fights are fun, I can't wait to retry them when I die, but what I'm not excited about is spending minutes running past enemies and hoping I can reach the boss with full health. The difficulty is not the problem here, it's the punishment incurred every time you die. This extends to the level design. It feels designed to annoy the player. When you collide with certain stage hazards like spikes, the game will send you back to the last spot where you touched solid ground. I hate this type of level design. Subtracting your progress ruins the flow of exploration. This doesn't happen in Castlevania. If you touch a stage hazard, you don't warp back to your last grounded location. You just take damage because the stage hazards are not designed to trap you. If the stage hazards and pitfalls didn't boot you back to your starting space in Hollow Knight, a lot of them would trap you until you die. Instead of punishing you that severely for making a single mistake, the game resets your progress. But stronger level design would reset your progress in an organic way by having the level loop in on itself if you mess up your platforming without teleporting you for colliding with the hazards. And Hollow Knight already does this frequently, which makes these warp hazards feel worse because the devs already know how to circumvent this issue. And when you tie all of these problems together, what you have is a game that isn't fun to play. When you're not fighting enemies just moving in a straight line, you don't have any engaging movement tech to rely on to speed up your movement. When you are fighting enemies, you need to watch out for recoil and exploding money, or sacrifice your customization options for quality of life improvements. When you die, you need to rush for your corpse or you lose all of your money. When you die to a boss, you need to run back to it and hope you can enter the fight with full health. When you enter a new area, you need to find the map NPC ASAP or you're moving around completely blind. When you do get the map, you need to routinely rest at a bench to update it. When you want to change your build, you need to rearrange your charms every time instead of swapping between saved loadouts. If this were a linear action game, I'd probably enjoy it, but instead of asking Hollow Knight to be something it's not, I chose to stop playing it. The platforming doesn't feel smooth or rewarding enough to warrant the 20 or 30 hours it'd take to reach the credits. As great as the boss fights are, they're not the reason why I play these games. They account for a small portion of the full experience. Castlevania is shorter and more focused, yet offers so much more variety. And that's not just because it's an RPG. Remember, people love to call this genre Metroidvania. Of course I'm gonna compare games like Hollow Knight to the greats. And this is just in terms of gameplay mechanics. I didn't talk about the art and music of Hollow Knight, and even in this department I think Hollow Knight falls short. The soundtrack works well to set the atmosphere, but there's not a single tune I'd listen to outside the game. Many of the exploration tracks are soft, ambient songs that are easy on the ears, but they're lacking in catchy melodies. They're not feet-tapping songs. Meanwhile, the entire Castlevania series is filled with 100 songs I routinely listen to, and probably 20 of them are from Order of Ecclesia. The art style is fine. I like the muted color palette and the attention to detail with things like the rain pouring off the edges, but while the environmental work is solid, the character and enemy designs look too similar to one another. There's no cool death animations like in Castlevania, where half the fun of killing enemies is watching how they die. People bring up the small dev team of 3 people and the low price tag as selling points, like I should cut Hollow Knight some slack for being an ambitious indie game. But every single game on planet Earth uses up my free time at an equal rate. I'm not going to be lenient with certain games because they all use up the same resource, so I'm going to judge them equally. This game is packed with content with all of its optional areas, bosses, and alternate endings, and if that's what you value in a game, you'll probably adore Hollow Knight. 20 years ago, I would have felt the same way. These days, a game having 60 hours worth of content isn't a selling point for me anymore. I'm on the lookout for games that don't overstay their welcome. In the time it took for me to give up on Hollow Knight for my most recent playthrough, I beat Order of Ecclesia. a game with much less content, but is still satisfying to play after half a dozen playthroughs. Hollow Knight is by no means a terrible unplayable game, but the feel of exploration doesn't hold up to the standards established with this genre many years ago, and for an exploration platformer, that matters a whole hell of a lot.